So that's recording. Where's Roshan? It's going to be there for eternity. Yeah, let's do Alright, welcome everyone to the quarterfinals of KDU Pro-Ams 2017. I'd like to congratulate all 4 teams for making it thus far. In opening government, we have KDJ Guys Keep Quiet. In opening opposition, we have IIUM. In closing government, we have CFS Setan Pakai Prada. We're the only one cheering for this out. Closing opposition, we have Nous C. Alright, judging with my name is Moya and chef today, judging with me alongside me is Fatana and Kieran, both from Mara. A reminder to the audience, please keep your chatting and discussions to a minimum so as to not distract the judges. Only enter and exit the room in between speeches. Without further ado, the House of Course Prime Minister open debate. Hey there.
Education is of utmost importance to all children. And education exists not only in school, but at home as well. And maintaining this consistency of education and ensuring that we provide the best education for our children is the most important issue to tackle in this debate. Firstly, the reason that we support the idea of parents having teachers who suit their methods is that there are 3 levels of arguments. The first is the cohesiveness. So you have to have a cohesiveness between what parents do to how parents teach their children and how teachers teach their children. And this is really effective because more often than not in status quo, parents and teachers have disparities due to their different incentives and different viewpoints when they see children. So for example, parents are more likely to have teaching methods that suit their children based on how their children grew up, based on the circumstantial nature of their children, based on how children grew and developed in the home. Whereas teachers have methods based on what they believe can quantifiably be the suggested method. Teachers' teaching methods tend to be based on what gets them the pay cut the best way, what gives them the most benefit for the work that they're doing. And these conflicting incentives often mean that children are stuck between what their parents want and what their teachers want. And this is a bad thing. So firstly, the way that we structure our policy for this motion is that parents fill out a survey as to what preferred teaching methods they would want. And these include things like the level of leniency, the style of teaching, the medium of instruction, etc. Then the school body employs a variety of teachers which suit the requirements of the parents. Now, we acknowledge that in realistic scenarios, it may not be real to assume that you get the exact kind of teacher, but in our scenario, we'll assume the best possible alternative for what the parents want. And also what this means is children who follow better through similar teaching methods end up being put in similar classes. And we'll explain why this is beneficial later, but first, yes.
So if cohesiveness is so important, why would you allow them to control the syllabuses? But also, would you allow them to control like what kind of scoring methods to use?
I think the kinds of scoring methods used is actually a really important rubric in determining. However, we feel the reason that scoring methods are often done differently to teaching methods is because scoring methods have to be used on a national or often regional scale when it comes to assessing the placement of children in universities and for higher education. So it's because of those reasons that scoring methods aren't tailored to parents' needs. Although ideally it would be suitable if we could. However, teaching methods are things that we can tailor to people's needs because there isn't a fixed or national rubric that we have to put teaching methods on. That's why things like curriculums are set because there has to be a national rubric as to what is taught in order to ensure how the progression is forward. But we believe that the method of teaching is just as important as the matter and that has to be tailored specifically as to what the parents want. And this is why. Firstly, parents Or parents often develop their children in ways that allows them to understand things better. So here's the situation, right? Imagine you're a child who's been brought up by parents who tell them to push their limits further. Brought up by parents who tell them they should challenge their syllabus and that they should attempt work that is higher or beyond their level. In those scenarios, what happens is, if a teacher ends up having very basic or very restrictive forms of curriculum, children often feel bored in class. When teachers teach things that are often what you call stringent upon a very basic or standard method of teaching, children feel bored, and this is bad. On the other hand, when you have teachers that want to expand and push beyond the levels of the curriculum and deliver methods that are more innovative or new, the problem is children at home who are brought up with a more traditional style of learning end up suffering in class because they aren't able to cope with the way in which teachers are teaching in school. And this is the main harm in this debate. Because if you have the disparity between how parents teach and how teachers teach, then that consistency of education becomes a problem. It means that education isn't as good as it can be because children, in essence, aren't able to relate both ways from what parents want and what their teachers want. And this disparity is a problem. Yes. One more.
Should education be catered towards helping the students survive in the real world and not instead helping them start in their own traditional ways?
Okay, in regards to having students survive in the real world, we would argue that there are a variety of ways in which someone can develop in the real world. There's not to say that there is a standard fixed rubric as to what the teacher says is the way in which they survive in the real world. In fact, more often than not, this conflict between parents and teachers ends up in children not really being able to survive in the real world because the kind of skills and education that you are taught at home, in fact, by parents, helps you survive in the real world. So on that comparative, we say that parents should actually, that you're supporting our case because if parents intervene in the way teachers do their methods, it means that children are more likely to follow their parents' rubric as to what they would be able to do to survive in the real world. Sit down. So essentially, this is the comparative, right? On their side, you have differences in education. The harms of which being that teachers end up looking bad when they get students whose parents think that the teaching methods are inadequate, and on the other hand, you have parents who end up, on the other hand, you have students who end up feeling inadequate because they are put in which teachers' methods aren't suited to what they're used to at home. So it forces students to have to choose between the kinds of methods that parents and teachers employ. Remember that forcing students to make this choice is terrible. What is better on our side of the house is where teachers and parents have a consistent method, a method which can follow through, so that what is cohesive at home and what is cohesive at school are together. And this allows students to develop education in a way that allows them to be unified in their pursuit. And what this means is that students end up being educated better because the conflicts that exist on your side with the disparities of education do not exist on ours. On our side, we have a framework that allows the development of a child both at home and at school. And we believe that, okay, and let's assume that, let's take our worst case where you have really strict parents or really lenient parents. Even so, we say that on our side, it is still better because those are exceptions and those are things that parents do consent to at the end of the day. But the vast majority of people would benefit more from our scheme than yours with the disparities. And with that, I am very, very proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, to begin the opposition's case. I'll just call the opposition.
So the government assumes that if a parent were to impose their preferences on teaching, then suddenly it would be more linear and more sort of diverse way of teaching comparison to like our world, right? I'll tell you why that's not true. Firstly, recognize that parents and teachers' preference is basically what parents think of their own children. We think that the model that we propose is not necessarily where, it's not when parents can impose their teaching preferences, but we think it's best for the educators in and of itself to create, to decide and accommodate to each student. So this will come in the form of having like schools or like larger teaching bodies can create boundaries in which there is a limit of leniency and limit of being strict. This means that they can, and in between those limits, we think that personal educators or personal teachers have the ability to accommodate to each and every student. That means if a student gets a D, I will be more hard on her, or I will be more accommodating to that person. If say a person gets an A, etc. Right? So we think that this form creates a sort of more, a sort of like diversity of methods in which the teachers have the ability to be more personal in their teaching methods in comparison to if the teacher was like were to give their if parents were to give their preference. But before that, clarification: we don't think it's about the syllabus that you learn about or exactly what you learn in school, but rather how you are being taught and the ways that the teacher acts upon you in class. For example, like the workload that you get or the sort of teaching methods that the teacher puts on you, right? Now, firstly, I think it's also important to recognize this, that there is a number one, there is a boundary, so that means there is a spectrum of leniency or strictness that a teacher can impose because the only limits they have are boundaries. But secondly, we think that educators have the ability to adapt personally to students, and then we think that in that case there is more of diverse, like a spectrum way of teaching, right? But first argument, right? Rebuttals will be integrated. Firstly, we think why schools are better deciders than parents, because we think that under their side they assume that parents know best. I would assume that the reason why they assume this is because parents are necessarily close to their students. We tell you that close is not a metric of knowing your child. Why? Number one, being close or being raised by your child means that you are emotionally involved with them. Meaning, and notice that being emotionally involved in this relationship in and of itself also means that you are the dominant one because you are the one that raised your child. So this means that closeness doesn't mean you know the person. Being close means that the parent project their ideas upon their children. So this creates an illusion that the parents know their children because the parents think that they are close to their children. So they oftentimes impose what they think upon their children. So number one, this is like the reason why parents don't understand their children. Number one, there is no understanding, because notice this also, that the dynamic and relationship that a parent has with their child may differ from the child's relationship with a teacher or a child's relationship with a friend. We think that because there is a difference in this, it is unfair for you to impose a sort of cohesive version of teaching only from this, and the deciding factor was only what the parents thought or what or the relationship that the parents have with a child. But secondly, we think that parents in of itself do not have information about educating methods, right? What does this look like? This necessarily looks like parents not having parents not learning about education or methods of educating. We think that educators under our side can cater to this more because number one, they take courses on how to teach and they learn about the methods of how to deal with certain types of children and these sort of and the psychology behind why a child acts this way, so they know how to accommodate. But secondly, they have experience, meaning they have met children like so and so, and they know how to deal with this and they know how to like balance this. Sure, go.
Ma'am, in order for your policy to work in a class of 40, teachers need to get information from parents, which means you're already half-heartedly copying out the movement because you still match what parents want.
What the heck? I'm sure, okay, no. Right, so, no, but if teachers work so much, I don't think that's a problem. What? Right, so we tell you that this problem is actually worse when the parents don't know what's best for their children, when there is a disparity between privileged parents and underprivileged parents. What does this look like? Notice that oftentimes privileged parents are more likely to get a higher education and more likely to have experience in the formal work field. We think that this inherently means that they have the ability to understand like an education system better. So this means that privileged parents, their preferences will more likely be a better preference in comparison to an underprivileged parent in which they have no experience in a formal education setting or a education setting that is of quality. This means that oftentimes underprivileged parents will be like single-minded and single-faceted in terms of imposing what they think is best for their child. Meaning, if they are strict, oftentimes they want the teaching to be strict. This, in fact, is necessarily harmful because then this creates a disparity between privileged and underprivileged people, in which underprivileged people are necessarily stuck in their area, in which they have the inability for teachers to accommodate to them, and rich people in and of itself have have their preferences will necessarily assist them in being like better students, right? So we think this disparity is actually harmful. But secondly, right? Why we think that it's necessarily important for schools to defer from home teaching and this directly engages to opening up, right? We think that number one is to note that the forms of teaching that parents will impose is that these parents are likely to teach what they would teach at home. This means that if you were to depend on the parents' preference, what you learn in school will reflect what you teach at home. This is because oftentimes parents think that their methods of teaching is what's best for the children, because that is the reason why they teach their child that way. That means that if they think that child is necessarily a naughty child, they will think that being strict is the best. So their preference are likely to replicate or like sort of reflect how they do home teaching. No. So this looks like their child being strict in 2 areas of their life. So why is this necessarily harmful? We think that cohesiveness necessarily means unbalance. That means that there will be a sort of there will be a consistent strictness in the child's life or consistent leniency in a child's life. And why is it necessarily harmful? It's because number one, in order for a child to be a comprehensive person and have the ability to like discover what's best for them, is for them to see the options of the teaching methods that are like presented to them. So we think that this balance is necessarily important because at the end of the day, we need, in a case in which the child is being taught strictly at home, a teacher can detect that and be able to accommodate and be a bit lenient with them. We think that this sort of difference ensures that there is no sort of extreme versions of strictness or extreme versions of leniency, which will ensure that this child have the inability to like sort of flourish as a human being, because oftentimes they might not, these sort of extreme versions of teaching might not accommodate to them or might not help them in order for them to live. So we think that it's better for you to have a spectrum of methods of teaching in which the child can recognize what is best for me. So in the case in which they leave school or they leave their parents, they know what is best for them and they can like ensure that they are not destroyed by the extreme leniency or the extreme sort of strictness. But then at the end of the day, the children under our side, the outcomes are that they become better people because they understand there is a balance and they have this balance in their life. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your contribution. Continue with this case.
Appa, Amma, if you're watching this, don't worry, I'm defending you, okay? So here's the thing, right? Opening opposition assume that for parents to make decisions on how they want their kids to be taught, they have to take 20 years of education about every single type of educational philosophy, teaching philosophy. We don't think so. Because I think the most amount of decisions that parents have to make that informs or influences the way in which they are taught in schools are simple things that they can rationalize in terms of things like, do we want more workload for our kids? Things that they can see. Do we want them to be more lenient or do we want them to be more strict? We don't need to know about like philosophies or like the ways in which every single thing is being taught, because we need to understand that parents are able to rationalize things when they see that their kid is suffering so much because of the intense amount of workload that's being given by teachers onto them in the first place. But secondly, I think the problem with opening opposition is not necessarily contesting why exactly is consistency or cohesiveness exactly a bad thing, especially since kids more often than not get confused when parents employ a different method of how they want to teach, but teachers teach a different method, which means that it's harder for them to know which exactly is the way in which they would want to live their life, ladies and gentlemen. For a large number of individuals, people like parents teach them that it's okay to be lenient, that sometimes we need to take it chill. Maybe exams are important, but sometimes life is important too. But then you go to school and your teachers say that if you don't take your exam seriously, you're an idiot who's doomed to fail in your real life. What is more likely to happen is that kid to not understand which viewpoint that kid should employ in his or her own life to view at life in and of itself. But secondly, what it also leads is the kids to not know who to trust, ladies and gentlemen. Meaning that what's more likely to happen is sometimes kids trusting their parents even more. What happens then is kids go to school every single day of their life not trusting their teachers. We can see this happening right now when more often than not kids say stuff like, the reason I'm not doing well is because my teacher is absolutely horrible. I can see this. I love economics. My teacher in KTJ sucks in teaching economics. Ladies and gentlemen, my parents actually tried to teach me important stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, what this means is that more often than not, what happens is kids tend to give up because they think that it's not that education is problematic, it's not that teaching is problematic, it's the teacher who is problematic, ladies and gentlemen. So in instances where people trust their parents even more, or instances where people have, like kids or students have been growing up trusting their parents, learning a lot from their parents, and realizing that maybe that is the best form of thing to do because the parents have been teaching them for so long, you make them not trust the teachers, make them feel demotivated in these instances, and I think that's a horrible thing. Sit down. So what is the main thing that we got from opening opposition? They said that teachers know their kids better. I think here's the problem, right? The first analysis that came out was that parents are emotionally invested. I think this is a good thing because the emotional investments in parents means that they're more likely to tinker or find their own philosophy that caters more to the kids themselves. In comparison, the teachers in your world are teachers that don't look at kids as things that have like people that have emotional investments for, but rather students that they need to make sure get 100 in their exams so that they get paid better. We can see this in countries like India, where there was survey whether like Pratam schools in India, whether they have teachers who are good. But teachers hate their students and don't actually want to teach better because they're placed in shitty classes with low ability students, ladies and gentlemen. What happens more is teachers are more likely to care about grades, to care about whether or not they have a good reputation, ladies and gentlemen. Means they're more likely to be grade intensive, education intensive. That's why you have teachers that give you intense amount of workloads. Teachers who humiliate you in your classes if you ask a stupid question when someone is teaching you double maths, ladies and gentlemen. All these things because teachers care more about making sure the students like get the grades because it affects them as well. In comparison to parents are more likely to be lenient with, or more likely to rationalize it based on how it affects their kids as well because it's their kids, ladies and gentlemen. Teachers are less likely to care because there'll be some students who are okay with it and they'll use that to justify the treatment to some other people who are not okay with this treatment to begin with, and I think that is a horrible thing. Closing, yeah.
Yeah, so it carries wrong philosophies and all these harmful philosophies they talk about, and these kids suffer from it. What happens to these kids?
Okay, so here's the thing, right? At the worst case, I think parents, at least kids, get to still take comfort in the fact that it's something that like they don't become even more confused at the point in which it becomes uncertain as to who they trust or who they not trust, ladies and gentlemen. Because what happens in your world is that you make it even harder for kids to find out their own style of learning. Because now what happens is you make people, like you make students even like confused as to whether they should trust the teachers, whether should they trust your parents. But more on that, right? We tell you, secondly, they said that teachers like train more, they have more experiences and things like that. We already told you why the incentive structure is extremely different and why the incentive structure is the most important thing in determining how parents or teachers actually employ the teaching philosophies to begin with. But more, secondly, right, what happens more under your world is teachers are demonized. Kids don't get to decide. Kids more likely to say stuff like teachers are horrible thing. You're more likely to have parents who say stuff like your schools are destroying my kids. That destroys any sort of ability for teachers or education system to carry on smoothly. Because what happens in your world is parents or teachers or parents or kids or like the family get to say stuff like you're destroying the kids' education. And I think that's bad because that interrupts any sort of policy or interrupts any sort of cohesiveness that we would want, ladies and gentlemen. Because now what happens more is teachers who even want to say good things will get demonized even more, and I think that's a horrible metric to put on students. But secondly, right, the large amount of effects that actually happens is towards students themselves because of the inability for teachers under their world to determine whether or not this student works better when there's tough love, when there's leniency. It also translates into how we teach them to begin with, whether we become more innovative, whether we focus on traditionally rudimentary stuff in our cases. What happens then is you end up having people in different classes with teachers that doesn't exactly suit them. What happens then to a student is a low self-esteem, feeling that they're inadequate, feeling that in a class where maybe it's because I'm stupid, where everyone else is being fine with the teachers. So when you have different people in different classes, what people who don't agree with the teacher are more likely to think is that because they are stupid is why they cannot understand the teacher. And I think that's a horrible metric. In comparison, when you have people who think the same way, people who want to learn the same way, you're more likely to have people thinking that maybe this is how I would want to learn. Maybe I have a better chance now because everyone is learning at the same pace. Ladies and gentlemen, parents know their kids. Parents want to care for their kids. That is way better in comparison to teachers who just want to be strict because they want to get a bigger pay.
Thank you very much. Yes, those the opening up, house calls, yellow.
We have decades of research trying to figure out what kind of learning actually teaches children to internalize what they're doing. Then we have parents who say, hey, last time I grounded them, it worked, they didn't do it again. Parents, in their limited rationality, at their best case scenario when they try their best, don't have the capacity to understand long-term consequences that might occur, whether or not children understand intrinsic values or not. And they can't, and they don't have the ability to innately change their own personality to change the shifting needs of children as they grow up. And I think that's what was most important in this debate. Yes, you need decades of research to handle children because children are basically there are ways in which you approach them that makes them learn like things better. It's science, and parents don't know it. Like, okay, so a few things in this debate. First, in terms of like whether or not some of the things they want to talk about, is my speech will be unstructured. So first, in terms of like, they said, guys, teachers are likely to be grade oriented. The response to that is, that's a policy change. You can just change incentive structures to make teachers not policy like grade oriented. That's a response. But in fact, if anything, we will go further and say, in fact, research within educators has shown that it is ineffective, meaning that in educational courses, you're less likely to have teaching methods that are so grade oriented that work children out of their minds, as opposed to parents who are more likely to be that way. Because in the vast majority of instances, yes, we like to think whatever, but at the same time, we also end up projecting the same things our parents did to us, because that's the only experience we have of handling children. That's why parents often just keep doing what their parents did to them, because they think they turned out fine, and that's why their children will turn out fine as a consequence of it. It's like the same thing people say when like they live through a culture of fear growing up as a result of being abused, but all of a sudden when they're grown up, they're like, I turned out fine, so it must have worked. Those are the kinds of things that people do all the time. Obviously, I give an extreme example, but it works even in nuanced cases also, right? So in that particular situation, what we're looking at is that we are looking at parents not being able to understand all of those things, whereas educators have the ability to evolve beyond all of those things, right? So the next thing that they said, but guys, when you have like-minded people in the same room, that's amazing because they learn at the same pace. This is not a separation between IQs or how they are performing in classes. You have children who are dumb and children who are intelligent in the same room, and they learn at very different paces, even though the method used is the same. And in fact, the problem is much worse under yours, because when you're separating by categories of teaching method, you have less ability to separate based on the pace needed of those children, because that's how you use prioritizing separation needs. We have more of an ability to separate based on the pace needed of children, and that's how we cater more towards them. CGSPI, like, oh, 1:40, how are you going to tackle that ratio? Like, the policy change, we just have less students to a teacher ratio. I think individualized needs can be taken care of. And our work, that's another policy change. I don't know why that's a problem. Okay, so moving on in terms of like, why do we think teachers are bad? So furthermore, look, here's why teachers are better capable of adapting to, teachers are better able to adapt to children's needs. You can notice their behavior and try to analyze what kind of things you do. Why are they better? Because because they already have preset guidelines in terms of what they can't and cannot exceed, as opposed to parents who don't. The second is because they already have training in terms of looking at children's behavior and knowing what works with those kinds of children. Therefore, even the shittiest teacher is better capable than the average parent at being able to do all of those kinds of things. But I don't think they responded to the most important things that we talked about. One is that parents are generally either strict or lenient, right? And that's the problem. I think the problem is when you are a particularly strict parent, you're more likely to think that's what works, and that's why you should continuously have strict parents. That's why it's particularly bad. By the way, like, it's not like extreme abusive parents. Anyone who's just generally strict will want another strict, like, teacher also, right? And that is problematic because these are children who then don't have safe spaces where they can express themselves. They don't have authorities who they can go to when they're bullied because everyone around them is strict as hell. That's why you don't have proper growth of these children. If everyone is lenient and the child is a brat who is spoiled by the parents, these children don't have disciplinarians in their life who can actually teach them how to behave, how to actually adapt to society in those particular circumstances. You are screwing these children to bits. Sure.
Sir, 5.8% of American children are being homeschooled. The large majority of them are being sent to religious school. The reason it happens is because parents can't get what they want. Are you okay with them taking the alternative in comparison to them attending a public school?
Amazing. Okay. So what we will do is we will ban homeschooling. We will force them to go to schools. We have done that before in many countries in Scandinavia, for example, right? But also, let's just respond to this whole like concept of, and we'll ban religious schools. They're absolutely shit. So in terms of cohesiveness, right? In terms of cohesiveness, this is the extension of what OG said. Basically, they're like, but what if the child is confused? My first response is a principal one. If you have a problem with the confusion, that means you would also then be okay with the syllabus remaining the same between parents and children. Don't we forcibly teach evolution to children and sex education to Christian children who are taught abstinence by their parents and thought that evolution is wrong? We don't, because confusion is not the metric through which schools are supposed to do the wrong thing, because what is right is always right. But second, in terms of a more volume-based, in terms of like more materialistic response, is that views in life differ between people. I don't think children can't fathom that someone is strict and someone is not strict. I think that's quite simple enough for children to fathom, as opposed to an actual syllabus difference that exists between what parents teach and what teachers teach. But I also think it's very good for options to exist, because that's how children learn and have options, as opposed to being tied down to only one narrative of life and what works, what they think works. Because they're also going to be future guardians who are going to teach other people. It's good that they get exposed to multiple narratives so that they're better able to teach other people in the future. But final response is this: it is okay to question authority figures. I think it's a good thing that people question teachers and think teachers are not good or parents are not teaching the right thing sometimes, because questioning of authority figures means that those people are less able to exploit the power position that they're in order to be able to subtly indoctrinate you in the long run. I think that's good that children learn to question this. But also, finally, I think they allow subtle forms of ideology and privilege to exist. For example, privileged parents are more capable than underprivileged parents at looking at what kind of teaching methods works, and that means the disparity between richer parents and poorer parents in terms of like creating social mobility for their children becomes much worse under their side. Hannah said this, they didn't respond. But also, is that medium of instruction. Obviously, poorer families who have more ties to culture are more likely to reject global languages such as English, etc. That ties them down to poverty more likely. You have gendered constructs by parents who think daughters should be given less freedom that will be imposed now by schools also. These are all cultural, ideological constructs that overtly now get indoctrinated further through the education system as an extension of the ideological, disturbing ideologies of the parents as well. These are things we can never stand for. We oppose.
Yeah.
I think this debate lacked a lot of context. This debate is about parents in terms of like crafting out their own educational method. It's about matching what they want their children to learn in public schools. In my speech, I'll be providing characterization of what kind of parents actually want to involve themselves within this particular policy, and also be responding to Mubarak in terms of his call out towards our POI, right? So first of all, let's talk about the rebuttal in terms of how educators can evolve. So this entire op bench thinks that if a parent is involved in matching what they want, it automatically means that that parent dictates every single form of syllabus or every single thing that a child learns, as if that parent is that particular teacher. We have a few things in my speech that I need to clear out in this debate before I can move on to my extension. Firstly, I I think that more often than not, the parents that want this are parents that are relatively conservative, parents that are willing to go to every single extent to make sure that their child is protected because they care for their child and want the best for their child. This means it comes at the expense of perhaps homeschooling that child in attempt to protect them from that particular bubble. How did Mubarak respond to this? Firstly, he said that we should completely ban homeschool. It's completely fine. We think in order for you to do this, you need to subsidize education, which for a fact doesn't happen within status quo. Secondly, debating also isn't about just a new response in terms of a new mechanism, but also he didn't even provide a principled justification as to why the government has a full autonomy in dictating how that child lives when the government always allows parents to make a lot of decisions within status quo insofar that it doesn't amount to abuse. For example, the principal justification to this "I'm not done" is in terms of children being put in public schools by their parents, or children being placed within private schools, or being conducted in a kind of environment that they are in within schools within those particular instances. We think that these are all decisions that the state allows you to make. Now I don't understand why the state cannot extend this particular principle in making sure the kind of syllabus that their child learns is in line with them. No, thank you. What about parents this became the debate about proximity and whatever, right? I think that it's the autonomy that these parents have, whereby they will be able to do a lot of things to you. In terms of privileged parents, I think the alternative that happens is they opt out of school, they are not part of today's debate. Sit down. Firstly, let's talk about my extension, right? What is the unique thing about schools and why a lot of individuals participate within schools? Firstly, is in terms of the accountability that happens when parents send their kids to public schools with the matching of a particular syllabus. Accountability. The methods that you learn or the subjects that you learn are always going to be vetted by the state, making sure that the philosophies that you learn are in line with what you learn without being extremely ideological. So for example, we're not going to teach terrorism in schools, right? I'm not going to teach you how to hand guns in school. Those things are just really extreme. And also, religious schools will continuously exist within your world, where parents will always pull you out to be there. Secondly, in terms of teachers making sure that things are more conducive for that particular student, in terms of engaging in more intellectual conversation with that particular student about the subject that their parent wanted to learn. In their world, a lot of things that will exist are like echo chambers, right? Where parents will always indoctrinate that particular child into believing whatever that they want, and then they become the teachers themselves for that particular child. An educator will always be able to make sure things are as objective as possible, even when it comes to things such as religion. Exactly. Educators are not mutually exclusive on the outside, guys, except we can teach them, and the syllabus that you stream is by your parents, and I think that's even better since parents already make those decisions. Sit down. Why is the state's incentive to match the teachers based with their particular preferences? Firstly, because an education's end goal is always to gain inclusivity. So rather than exclusivity, which exists in your world, we don't aim to make your child become Aristotle or make your child a person who is like Albert Einstein. But we do want a minimum set of literacy of things like math, or minimum sets of you to be at least literate within those particular instances. What happens in your world in an extreme worst case scenario is that individuals who are conservative, individuals who think that your life is better off, will end up moving you out of those particular schools because it isn't in line, right? Because there are different kinds of education that exists within status quo. So for example, in Texas, they teach you things like creationism. In Washington, the converse is in terms of biology and evolution, right? No, thank you. What happens when there is an existence of you in school? In terms of assimilation, the fact that you have more competition, or you are more prone to assimilating with a lot of your other students within class, have more conversations, or the fact that you can progress socially with a lot of other people. That's why when people are put in homeschool situations, more often than not, they are socially inept, or individuals who will never be participative in the future. These are individuals who lose out in your world, and this environment is oftentimes horrible for these particular individuals. Opposition needs to tell us why it's important to defend a government that is dictating what they think is right within those particular instances. You cannot access that particular education in world in a world where conservative parents already dictate what you believe in. Closing.
Yeah. So firstly, will you change the syllabus because your opening said they wouldn't? And secondly, how do you change the syllabus if your government, you say the government is going to ban the syllabus in the first place?
Okay, so like the syllabus is the one that government already streamlines. Like, I'm not gonna knife opening, right? Like opening said there's a survey, they'll click on certain subjects and then these will learn the subjects. It doesn't matter what the parents want their kids to learn. I don't understand why this technicality is a big deal in comparison to the alternative that exists in your world. I think the principal justification that they need to prove is if like students should succumb to the things that their parents already teach them behind closed doors. But now, in a more educational setup, a setup where there are corrective measures and accountable measures to ensure that your child is not radicalized in that particular process. To make sure that the process of which you know is as objective as possible in comparison to parents having no complete incentive to make sure that you learn as objective as possible. And this is because they want to impose the practices that they want on you. We're not going to tell you from closing government that parents are perfect. But in order to safeguard that child is harmed when parents have no incentive to rectify the kind of things that they teach. I think in an educational setup, you will be able to fix that, coincide with closing government.
Very much. Member Gov to begin the society closing all last calls. Member Gov.
I think a debate that mostly involves students and how students need to learn and develop, I think it's ironic that students have not been talked about. The development of students isn't one that's static, isn't one that's only at particular points in time, it's one that constantly changes even throughout years, right? I don't think that was analyzed within any of the houses. There'll be my extension on the house today. But before that, right, let's go into closing government, because I find the case a little bit weird, right? Because it sounds like they're knifing the opening government when they want to talk about changing syllabus and religious schools. Let's go on two levels, because Umar wanted to knife them, but not really knife them, right? So one, if you do not change the syllabus, then all your parents will still go into your religious schools anyway, right? It means they will still opt into homeschooling. They would still prefer to send their kids to these areas, right? They don't want them to go into they would want them to go into public schools and learn creationism. So that means all your students that go into that will still learn the same conservative information that you get, right? So what does this mean? This means either A, you change your syllabus and these people come into your schools and still become conservative, still become extreme, or B, you don't change your syllabus and you get all the same harms that exist on outside the house, right? It means people leave and go to religious schools. I think the better solution would simply be to ban these schools, right? To simply remove these schools from existence and force them to go into public schools where they have to engage with other arguments, where they have to go into areas where they have to talk about whether their religious beliefs are legitimate and justified and engage with these things. Religious schools should be something that is complemented public school, but not one that replaces public school. I don't think there's a fair analysis coming up from their side of the house. Secondly, right, they also wanted to have somehow or other extremism, but moderation of extremism, and that's another contradiction that I feel came up from their side of the house. What does this mean? They want to change the syllabus in order for people to be to have more access to education, right? Meaning entering public schools and so on. So, for example, if I have a religious scripture, I want to bring that religious education into my schools and teach that within my schools, or employ that philosophy within my teachings. But on top of that, I also want the state to vet this philosophy somehow or other, right? I want the state to go through and make sure that it's not extreme and so on. Firstly, if parents want to teach extreme philosophies to your child and your state is vetting these extreme philosophies, right? That means they wouldn't send your child to these schools anyway. That means, or you will still go into religious schools on your side of the house, firstly. Secondly, if they do vet these things and if parents will remove this, I would say it's better than being forced people to go into public schools in the first place, right? Extremism needs to be challenged head on. Secondly, I think the biggest harm coming out from their side of the house when students go into religious schools is the diffraction of the society, right? This means that different aspects of society creates enclaves within these areas. At the point that you bring them to public schools, I don't understand why this harm doesn't exist, because these people still learn the same syllabus, these people are still just extreme as you want them to be, and these people still don't engage in any normal conversation. So I don't see what's the benefit that you get on your side of the house. Lastly, they want to talk about the students having students coming to what parents want and whether or not that's harmful, so on. I'll deal with that within my extension. Let's go to opening really quickly, right? Opening, want to talk about a couple of things. Firstly, they want to talk about how teachers are demonized within the circumstances, how it's harmful when teachers become more aggressive because they want profit margins. First level of response is different. Right? If teachers are so profit incentivized, other than simply their training policy, I would say the teachers want to cater towards the development of the students. It means they change their learning methods as they go on, right? Meaning the way that I start off when I was 7 years old isn't the same way that I start off when I'm 10 years old, the way that I learn when I'm 18 or 16. Firstly. Secondly, different subjects require different levels of analysis and understanding. I'll deal with that within my argumentations to show you why this is beneficial. Lastly, they don't talk about confusion. I want to understand something. When you have two conflicting ideas, it doesn't mean it immediately leads to confusion, right? I don't think that two conflicting ideas leads to confusion on one simple premise. Because the person that can decide whether or not you are a person that prefers incentives that hard or lighter workloads or harder workloads are the students themselves, right? Only I as a student can know whether I want this particular workload or I prefer this level of study in this particular type of study. I will contest to you that teachers are in the best position to be able to understand, develop, and change this on 3 levels. 1, what is education? How does it work? And why is it developed? But before that, I'll take a point if any of you guys have any. All right, what is education? I would say education is a journey that is long processes. When we talk about primary schools, secondary schools, the development of basic philosophical ideas or understandings in society. Meaning we learn English, we learn Bahasa Melayu, we learn maths, and all these different types of subjects in order to develop our understanding of the world. But more importantly, we're exposed to different types of societies and different types of understandings, right? It means we are exposed to people from different enclaves who understand things differently. As a child, it will be, for example, whether or not you prefer, whether or not, for example, health benefits, right? Or how parents raise children in the way there are some that are stricter parents who come up and like more strict in education, when some there are liberal parents, right? I think this is what we're talking about. So over the development of time, children change the way they learn, right? It means when I'm 7 years old, I may be someone that prefers harder workloads when it comes to mathematics and lighter workloads when it comes to Bahasa Melayu. But if I grow up, I may require like less workloads for maths and so on and so forth. Why are teachers in the best position to be able to decide this and not parents? I would tell you that parents tend to impose, due to strict emotional ties to this child, what they believe is best for the child based on whatever they have experienced in the past, right? They lack the understanding to be able to develop with the child. Teachers, however, are trained in the circumstances to be able to develop all these areas. I'll take closing.
Wouldn't people or parents be encouraged to send their children to public schools in comparison to religious schools at the point in which the syllabus changes, for example, or if it becomes more inclusive to what they want their child to learn?
Macha, one thing, right? If you're going to change the syllabus to make it inclusive, then all these people are still going to be conservative. You don't get your benefit of sending them to public school because there's lack of engagement, right? All your teachers are conservative, they go and teach the conservative syllabus. If you change the syllabus somewhere else, you're going to vet it, these people will still go towards your religious schools. I think the better solution is simply banning religious schools in the first place, forcing people into public schools and asking them to learn and develop and grow within public schools where teachers can cater towards them, where there are difference of ideas in this different understanding. But secondly, right, why is a plethora of ideas important for child's development at the point in time? I think at the point in which you're just at the house, where you're only exposed to one form of idea when you're 7 years old all the way up to you're 10 or 20 years old, you're only able to understand one type of understanding of how to study or how to improve yourself. It means you're unable to be able to cater towards different types of subjects or different types of learning methods because you've never been exposed to it as a child, because you lack the premise of understanding that children need in order to develop themselves, right? So what does this mean? That means I'm unlikely to be able to understand or rationalize or cater towards how I want to grow up or how I want to cater towards different subjects and syllabus later on. This means I'm unable to cope with a large majority of things I learned because I lack the experience of the plethora of ideas that my teachers were able to, right? So that means even though I may be a student that prefers a lighter workload, even if I got a heavier workload when I'm younger, it's better because then I know what I prefer, like I cater my education and tailor my education by myself and learn how to change it later on, compared to just at the house where I'm only exposed to these high ideas. If I'm someone that likes it, then it's beneficial. If I'm someone that doesn't, then it's unbeneficial. But either way, I'm never able to change and grow out of these circumstances because I'm never exposed to the ability to change and grow. But thirdly, let's talk about the long-term comparative in these circumstances, right? If a child is developed in a school in which they only learn one thing, they end up developing their child the same way because they lack the ability to be able to grow, right? So in the long term, over generations, you end up creating enclaves of students who can't understand studies. More students who fail because their parents don't know anything else but what they've been taught in schools, and what they've been taught in schools is monopolized by their parents and their ancestors, right? It means you create generations of students who are unable to cater and tailor their learning experience to be able to cater to a syllabus, right? So in the long term, I will tell you that students on their side of the house is one that is unable to be able to cater towards the long-term change in education and syllabus. For all those reasons, side with closing opposition.
This is not availability.
Live stream, so used to be a leading guy. He used to be, yeah, no, there used to be like the last, also like, there was actually a team in BC Pro-Ams named after him. I was like, oh, okay. Bobby Jindal, is it?
Bobby Jindal is the Florida governor. Bobby Jindal is the Florida governor.
There's no universal. How long have you not watched WWE?
It's like universal champion.
Yeah. Brock Lesnar. Yes.
Wait,
No, you watch that?
the WWE conversation be live streamed.
Yeah, I don't care. Everyone will be really good.
Apparently, there's plans to like to win it back in India.
Already, I empty the movie because they want EV stars and draw as many.
No, like apparently there's gonna be a live tour in India, so they want the Indian guy to win it in Indian soil back. Marketing.
Yeah.
Political.
Like, every time like, there's something big, right? I go to my WhatsApp group, we have this sense of peace. Alright, okay. Enough crazy with intuition. It looks like government case house calls government in it.
For a school that wants to teach liberal principle, side opposition decided to take a communism approach of changing school to conscription camp, where you force everyone to attend one singular ideology. And we don't think that side opposition justified in principle in regards to why do you take any form of autonomy away from parents altogether. And this is a huge shift from status quo, and we require a large amount of justification. And you can't simply say ban schools left and right without showing us why government in this particular regard should have full autonomy in deciding. But let's go to the principles in proper. Number one, in regards to like why is this consistent in regards to parents, the principle of locus parental in regards to parents deciding what is best for the children altogether. What we suggested from side closing government is we told you that government oftentimes give parents right already in deciding in a large plethora of stuff. For example, what do you choose to eat, what education you subscribe to, and so on and so forth. Which means you need to tell us exclusively why when it comes to school. Sit down, Barat. You lost your chance already. You already pointed out in the POI. You messed up. So let me just continue my speech. I'll take you later. All right. So in regards to this, as I was saying, parents are already being given the autonomy to decide in which school also the children need to attend. What side closing government specifically want to extend is we told you that the debate revolves around a framework of like plethora of subjects are available to you, and you simply match of which subjects that you like. We're not changing the syllabus altogether. And I think it was quite clear from Umai's speech, because this debate is not crafting a new educational policy or syllabus. It's not matching what do you prefer in regards to a large list. And I think opening government was also pretty clear in regards to that, and we're quite consistent in regards to that. The conclusion of his argument is, we think it is fine time parents are also heavily involved. The reason why we also say this is because who are the parents who are usually heavily involved in this particular policy to begin with? We think those parents who want to actively know what is best for their child and so on, sit down. So we don't think every single parent will co-opt into this particular policy that we suggested, but parents who are heavily interested to their child, who knows what is the best roadwork to my particular child and all together. But what is that opposition provide us alternatively? So Mubarak's half-hearted policy was, let's have a survey. We will let teachers decide how strict or how lenient we should be. In order for that particular module to work, to some extent, you do also need to get a degree of information from the parents, regardless, because it is impossible for someone to suddenly meet a random stranger on one day. You can automatically decide, I know how strict or how lenient I want to be to 7-year-old kids. It is almost impossible. So the best case scenario, or the reality is, you do get some input from your parents. But if you do that, don't you already like 50% matching those parents' tendency already? And doesn't that mean that you agree to us 50%? So I don't really think that you're debating such a motion. But even if he's consistent, but doesn't that defeat the argument that parents should not be investing at all in regards to education because they have that full length of emotional investment, and parents don't have the best ability to decide, and so on and so forth. So we don't think Mubarak principally able to show us the difference in that particular regards. Sit down. But second of all, I didn't time. Can someone give me a timer? Thank you, Mubarak. I owe you for this. I'll accept your POI in the 5 minutes. I promise you that it's being live streamed. Right, second issue is in regards to like why school is a unique place and why school should adopt the principle of inclusivity over any other principle. We from site closing government specifically told you that status quo is acting in a regards where it becomes exclusive. The reason why we think it's exclusive in nature is for several reasons. We think that rich people are able to opt out and go to private schools where they are able to adapt to systems where it suits them better. Which means the people who are most likely victimized on status quo are people who are most likely from conservative states, and we'll say that parents will simply choose you and put you in homeschool in return because they think that the school syllabus doesn't cater to your particular needs. Or alternatively, poor people who will take the students out from the school by saying that the school is quite strict in regards to teaching. I think it's better for you to work at a farm in return for you to go into education, and just simply failing in return. So we think these are the most likely scenario that's going to happen. But what is going to change on our paradigm? Sit down closing. I promise opening already. So Mubarak, keep standing, Mubarak. I'll accept you later. Right. So what we told you in return, we told you that our policy allows parents to be heavily involved, hence create an atmosphere of inclusivity. So parents are more likely to engage actively with the teachers. So the end outcome here is they're less likely to co-opt students out from the school, or less likely to bring them to homeschool in return, because they know they're able to, for some certain degree, control the amount of education available or given to the students in return. But before I move to my third issue, Mubarak.
Wrong case not allowing to ban. It should be banned. Last year, they were already banned homeschooling in religious schools. So your policy only applies to very few extreme parents in very few countries, but it's legal to be practiced.
But my first response to that would be, in the larger context of this debate, like America still allows homeschooling. You can't simply say that, guys, Scandinavia doesn't allow it. As debate is in Scandinavia because you didn't do it at the start of your LO speech. Don't think that that's a legit response. Ban everything, guys. Let's move on to the debate. Without telling me why this debate should evolve to a point where government should have full autonomy over students in general. There was no explanation altogether. We have given you enough and appropriate explanation. But third of all, in regards to like why, in general, assuming that whatever Mubarak said was true, and closing up to be general, they were rehashing Mubarak just to make it a point here in this debate. Is why you create an atmosphere where students in return are afraid to discuss with their parents. And this directly engages with some arguments given by CEO, which was slightly new but not so new altogether. Is because research has shown that students who discuss their education back with their parents perform better in terms of exams and so on later on. We think our paradigm creates an atmosphere where you feel more comfortable discussing with your parents because you know that your parents are less likely to be antagonistic towards the sort of syllabus that you learn in school because they are the ones who pick it in return in general. So they no longer have that particular fear of being taken out of school in general. The conclusion of this argument here is Not only does the child feel comfortable going to school because they are able to sit in a system where they are able to adapt in school in return, but when they go back from school and return back to their parents, they're able to tell stories about it because they believe that their parents are also okay with what they're learning in school. We think it's fine time everyone gets to go to school and not to extreme schools that Mubarak want to opt out of because he doesn't want to explain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go with.
Guys, before this, I used to work at a cookie store. And I quit my job and I started to work as an admin at a tuition center. And I realized one thing, that there's only one thing worse or harder than dealing with angry, hungry, cookie-loving customers, and that's dealing with parents. And although I just realized I'm going to get fired, but it's okay. I realized that parents have the best intentions of their children at heart, but I don't think that they're the best person to decide what their child, how their child should be learning in this case, right? This debate has largely revolved around three main clashes. And before I go into that, I'd just like to respond to CG because there are a couple of principal inconsistencies within their case, right? They don't seem to get their idea, right? Because the whole idea is that they want to give their parents the right to choose, and CG came out with a big principal argument why we do give parents the right to choose a lot of things about education, right? And they want to be able to give parents the ability to choose how their children are learning, the method of learning, right? And with this premise, with a second premise that they also agreed that the method of learning is more important than what you learn, right? They talked about it quite comprehensively and said that the method of learning is very important, right? And this goes to show that they're also, then if they're giving parents the authority to control something that is so important, which is how you learn, then you're also giving them the authority, it's in line with the principle that you will give parents the autonomy to choose what they learn, to choose their syllabus, right? I think that's bad, right? And they refuse to accept that they have to deal with the consequences that they're looking for a site that will allow governments, that will allow parents to choose their syllabus, right? Second, right now going through my clashes, right? One of the biggest clashes in this debate was that who should decide, right? Teacher or parent? Right. First, they told you that the only thing that they told you was that all parents are closer to their children, right? Number one, we think that's not necessarily true. Just because parents are at home with the children, that doesn't mean they know what the children is like at school. Because you observe, right, it's important to note that there are a lot of things, a lot of students are one way at home, but they're different way at school. No, thank you, right? Different way at school. Therefore, just because a parent knows how a child acts like at home, that doesn't mean that's what he acts like in the school or while he's being educated. We see the same sort of distinction when your dad acts differently at work than compared to when he acts at home. So you don't think that that's a very strong case, right? Second of all, even if, right, they tell you that because parents are heavily involved, they should choose. But they tell you that all parents, whether or not they are heavily involved, they will feel like they're heavily involved because they're your parents, and they like to think that they play a large part as a role in educating you, right? And even if they didn't really do much or they don't really understand you, they like to think, because psychology, they really need to believe that they are your parents and they do understand you, even when they don't. That's detrimental because you allow parents who don't actually understand you to dictate how you learn, even when your learning philosophies aren't in line with that. And next, they told you, they had a whole analyze confusion and distrust. Which actually we actually think we think that confliction of ideas, as Roshan came out with the other day, confliction of ideas is actually good, because that's when students actually discuss about the better learning methods that they want. How would you know if your learning method is not aligned with the teacher? If you never, so how would you know that you will prefer a different learning method other than the ones your parents use on you? You will never experience it in school, right? So then that's where schools provide this option for you. You never, no thank you, sit down, right guys? Okay, yes. So we think on that class, we think we really hands down that obviously teachers who are much more experienced in this, who are actually understand how the child acts in education and how they act in school. No, thank you. Should be the one to decide this. Roshan has already told you about. Right. And the last part, next class is about religious schools and homeschools in general. Right? We don't really get this premise, right? First of all, Korean government came up here and said they want to be able to allow parents to choose or not. If not, their parents just chuck them into homeschools. First of all, and then he went on and on about how homeschools are bad. First of all, I just have to point out that homeschools are actually run by your parents, right? So in their first premise is that parents are good at deciding what's good for your children. But now they say homeschools are bad which means that parents are teaching their child and parents deciding what their students learn and how they learn is bad. So this is a very big inconsistency in that case. Are parents good or are they not good for in teaching their children? We don't see the point in that case. Second of all, let's say you actually do change the syllabus, right? You talked about vetting the syllabus and making sure there's not extreme values, right? But in this case, the extreme parents who don't agree with that will still continue to send their children to this public school, to this religious school. But if you do change, and you do allow this, if you don't vet them, you do allow these children to go to these conservative schools, then the comparative is just that students, the comparative will just be that students who are homeschooled and students who are going to religious schools, and the comparative is just that students getting a conservative education in religious schools compared to students getting a conservative education in public schools. Within the outcome is the same. We don't see much difference. There's not really much any outcome in their case, right? And lastly, even if all this were true, right, we can just ban out all these public and religious schools. We don't see why there's a problem. We agree then that public schools and homeschools are bad because principals just cannot. No, thank you guys. I'm not taking anymore. I'm sorry about that. All right, and now going on to reiterate what Roshan said, which was really unique in this debate, right? Roshan was the only one who came up here and told you what would actually happen to students, right? He was the first person who actually told you like how education is, because that wasn't addressed at all in this in the debate about education, which is really ironic, I guess. He told you that education is a journey, right? Education is a journey whereby you may change your learning preferences over time, and therefore you need a plethora of options to be able to adapt to your different learning philosophies, because that's so you cater to these changes as you grow up and all this, right? We think that parents are unable to track this because they do not really understand what's going on in the classroom. And we tell you that CG didn't actually respond at all to all these arguments, right? They just dismissed it and said it was a rehash of Muba, and in actual fact, they don't know how to respond to the argument, right? Yes. So with all these things, we are very, very proud to. Of course, thank you.
expected impact from other things as well. How do you switch this off? Okay.
Itu maksudnya ini on, camera on. No. Let's just close it down. I think he locked
It's not.